Anthony Mackie, he has gone viral for a discussion that he had on the Pivot podcast. And I've interviewed Anthony Mackie several times back in the day when I was doing more entertainment stuff. Captain America, done some good work over the years. Some really great independent films as well, like Brother to Brother in the early part of his career. He's really worked hard. And he's soared. But he had this conversation that has gotten some people upset about masculinity and about American masculinity.
Yes.
I thought it was really interesting, and I thought it'd be great to chop it up with you about this, Dr. Jason Johnson. Let's play this clip of him on the Pivot podcast. And I want to add, I can't play the entire podcast. Folks are like, well, you didn't play the full thing. This is only a 3-hour radio show, so you can listen to it in full on the Pivot podcast. But in the beginning of the clip, he's talking about how the expectations he has for his sons, and they are not going to be acting a fool, and that's just the way that it's going to be. He actually sounds like my father, to be honest with you. My father's in his 60s, but he sounds like my daddy in many, many ways. But I wanted to play this. Let's check this out and talk about it after.
It's just that thing of, in the past 20 years, we've been living through the death of the American male. They have literally killed masculinity in our homes and our communities, for one reason or another. But I raised my boys to be young men. And however you feel about that, you feel about that. Right. But my boys will always be respectful. They will always say, yes, sir, yes, ma'am. No, sir, no, ma'am. They will always say thank you. They will always open the door for a lady. They will always make sure that their mother is taken care and provided for. They will always be men. And that's always since they were 2 years old. Every time I left for a job, I tell my 15-year-old, you're the man of the house. You make sure these doors are locked every night, this alarm is on, you text me or you call me every night before you go to bed and you wake up.
I love that.
Because we're men. If I'm not there to protect, he got to be there to protect. Because you can have all the money in the world, climb through the window, that money means nothing.
Right.
You can have all the celebrity in the world, jump through the door, that celebrity means nothing.
Yeah.
So you got to have a little guard in there, And so for me, it's always that idea of American masculinity is very different.
And I want to add, he also goes on to compare American masculinity to Europeans and to when he was in Kenya. I don't know why Kenya's in it, but okay. But this is interesting. And, there's some of this that resonated with me, and there's some that obviously didn't. But it's become a conversation, and I'll let you start. What are your thoughts on this, Dr. Jason Johnson?
So first off, I think this is always very important to say up front, and I have had these conversations with male friends of mine. I am not a parent, okay? And I always think it's important whenever you start talking about how people raise their kids that you make a distinction about who is and is not a parent, because that makes a huge difference in how you interact with the world, right? There is no young Black man who I sired, who I've had a responsibility to look after. And I suspect one day when I'm a father, I may have slightly different opinion on these things, which is fine, right? I'll go back and look at this video and be like, damn, Jason, it's not how you're treating your son. But all that being said, I'm like you, Clay. There are a lot of things that he said that I don't have any disagreement with. What's wrong with teaching somebody to be courteous? What's wrong with teaching your son to be respectful? The problem comes in with this. When you also, and I don't know if he does, so we're speaking about this in general, it's not a criticism of Anthony Mackie, but what are the expectations that you are putting in your child's mind for how the world responds to their masculinity, and how are you defining being a man in general? Because to me, respecting your mother, looking after your household, looking after your younger brothers and sisters and everything else like that, okay, that's fine. But that's not being a man. That's part of being in a family. Right? That's part of you do that with your nieces, nephews, regardless. What does it mean to be a man? And when I hear things like there's been an attack on the American man over the last 20, 25 years, I'm like, well, what do you mean by that? Because in a lot of ways, what it meant to be a man for a very long time was primarily economic. I make money, I kill the deer, I bring the deer home, and a woman takes care of the deer in the household. We no longer live in an economy where that is possible. Right. And so you have a lot of men, this is where we get into Trumpism. This is where we get into January 6th. This is where we get into incels. You have a lot of men who, if their power does not primarily stem from being able to economically care for a family, they don't feel like they men no more. So then you get into all these other issues of, well, how do I figure out if I'm a man if I can't make all this money? Then you get your Kevin Samuels. I just finished watching last night, Clay. I watched Adolescence, right? Which is this whole thing on Netflix, this 4-part series about this young, I'm not giving it away, but it's about it's this British kid who's 13 who kills a girl in his school. And you end up in these very interesting discussions about what it is to be a man and manhood and masculinity, Andrew Tate and everything else like that. So my issue is not with the behavior that Anthony Mackie is talking about. I think that behavior makes sense. I think, and I'm gonna be real about this, because I've changed on this. Telling a 15-year-old you're the man of the house, right? If that means you help your mother, if that means you make sure your little brothers get to school on time, if that means, hey, you mow the lawn, your mom's got other stuff to do, if that means, hey, making sure the doors are locked, that's fine. But if being the man of the house also comes with expectations of how women are supposed to treat you, of how you're supposed to move in the world economically, that creates a whole host of other problems. And that's what I think a lot of people don't understand. I read some of the comments under what Anthony Mackie said, and you have the same sort of asinine dynamics that you see. You have women saying, well, men don't know how to act like men. All right, well, if you want to have that discussion, we can talk about that kind of masculinity, that kind of manhood. It had certain expectations of women. If you want that kind of man, then you have to be that kind of woman, right? If you have a problem with that kind of manhood, that's fine too, right? But you have to we don't have clear definitions of this. And because of that, we end up sort of, rewashing and rehashing a lot of toxicity that we have tried through Gen X and the millennials to work our ways out of.
Yeah, it's a good point. There is a lot of romanticizing. We really romanticize a certain time, a certain era. I can recall what my aunties went through. You know what I'm saying? Like, I was born in 1977. I'm 47 years old. I'm a grown-ass man. There's a lot of romanticizing of the way things used to be, right? We see that a lot in all aspects, whether it's movies, music, the whole bit. But here are the things that I was wondering is an attack on masculinity. I just want to know who is doing the attacking.
Yes.
That's what I want to be curious about. Now, I believe there is an attack on, like you said, the way you framed it is perfect. Economics, the days of, dad goes to work, mom's a housewife. And let's be honest with you, some communities never had that option. Yeah. Some communities were always domestic servants, and the father was working in agriculture. So that whole Donna Reed vision, that was limited. There's a romanticizing of that as well. Just want to really, really be clear about that. But who is attacking masculinity? And because for me, it's almost like when I hear there's an attack on Christianity.
Right.
I mean, the majority of men in this country are quote unquote masculine, whatever that means. The majority of people in this country are quote unquote Christian. When I hear there's an attack on white people, the majority of folks in this country are white. So is it an attack, or is it just like a panic because there are different ways of being presented on how to be a man, right?
And I completely agree. And that's the problem, Clay. That's the problem. Because when you say things like, there's been an attack on manhood for the last 20 years, right? It becomes a Rorschach test for whatever insecurities that people have out there. Who's doing the attacking? Now, what you have a lot of people doing now, which is the problem, is they say it's women. Women are attacking our manhood. They got rappers out there talking about penis sizes. I can't believe that. They ain't supposed to do that. You got too many feminists. You got too many lesbians. All these sort of, it becomes an excuse for men who have issues to attack women, right? Women are not attacking masculinity. They're not. If you meet some individual woman that you feel attacks your masculinity as a man, then don't talk to her anymore, right? But the idea of what is attacking is almost as important as what's being attacked. And here's the problem, Clay. The attacks on masculinity stem from primarily economic and political forces, but also because you have a community that doesn't define what it is to be a man. Okay. And if you go back to some fantasy era in the 1970s, like you mentioned, many people, certainly in the African-American community, because of economic apartheid and everything else like that, a man's job was not solely bringing home enough money to take care of the family, because his wife probably did have to work. She did have to work at a domestic. She did have to work at a family. So manhood was defined as taking what power you have to protect and be benevolent to those who you are indebted to and those who you are responsible for. That was manhood. Manhood was, I love my wife, I love my kids. Manhood was, I help my neighbor when they're in trouble. Manhood was, hey, if my brother just got out of jail or got out of rehab or something else like that, if my sister-in-law's husband was mistreating her and her kids needed a place to stay, they can stay with me. They're going to be fine. Manhood was about power and benevolence. It wasn't about dominance and control. Now, it could be in unhealthy ways, right? But the best part of manhood was taking on the responsibility of using your power to the benefit and uplift of others. And somewhere in the last 35 or 40 years through our lives, manhood became, I am dominant because I have physical, financial, or logistic control. And anyone who doesn't view me as being the most dominant person in this relationship, in this office, et cetera, is attacking me. And again, most people don't know what it is to be a real man. So they think of it in these economic and power terms. And most people don't know how to receive a real man when they find one, because they have their own issues. And that, I think, is where a lot of these conversations come from. You got men saying I'm a man just because they got money and can pay bills, right? You had Kevin Samuels, who's gone today, but telling people like, you got to be a high value man. But what was his definition of high value man? It always had to do with money. It was always about money. It wasn't about what you gave. It wasn't about how you made a partner feel. It wasn't about how you cared for your children. It was, I make a certain amount of money, and this is why women should defer to me. That's where the problem comes from. That's where the problem comes from. And I'm not saying that I have the universal definition of what it is to be a man, but I know something about how you use power. I know I have a certain kind of power as a black man in America. And if I don't use that power to uplift other people, that don't make me a man. It makes me an adult with money.
So, two things. If we think that manhood has been hurt and broken, or there is an attack, you know what I would say? There has been an unattainable standard of manhood, especially black manhood.
Mm-hmm.
And some folks have argued that came along with the rise of hyper-masculine hip-hop. In the 80s, you had Rick James and Prince and, wearing a certain kind of clothes,
Michael Jackson.
Michael Jackson, what some would deem to be feminine today, quote unquote. So if there is an attack, I would say there are these unattainable standards that young black boys have to reach to, are you a real man? I'll never forget when I first moved to New York. I was walking down the street in Harlem in the late 90s. This might surprise people. This is a true story. I wrote about it in my first book, Live Through This, that I saw a shirt in the window. I'll never forget it, Jason. It said, a real man takes care of his kids. A real man doesn't deal drugs. A real man doesn't sleep with other men. Right?
All in the same shirt. Jesus.
All in the same. It was a black shirt and white letters. If I would have had a cell phone back then, I would have took a picture of it. And it was in the window of this store on 125th Street in Harlem. And I said, damn.
I think what is missing often in this discussion is we need to have a conversation as to what the through line of masculinity should be and what manhood is, and how any man at any level economically, any type of way sexually, any type of way, whatever, you can still be a man. Because the anger comes from the fact that, like you said, if the definition of a man is this economic power thing, right? And I don't have that, then I'm trying to prove that I'm a man in other ways that tend to be toxic. If I can't make $400,000 a year, and I can't have a big nice car, and I can't do this, then I guess I'm a man because I sleep with a bunch of women and I got a bunch of women on lock. I guess that makes me a man.
Right.
Not necessarily, right?
Yeah.
Like for me, a man is somebody who, through your behavior, through how you manage things, whether you are a bus driver, a public school teacher, an accountant, or a lawyer, right? Somebody, a woman, we'll say straight guy, a woman who has her own agency chooses to partner with you because of the power and benevolence that you show to other people. That's what a man is. How much of a man are you if you got people who are just dependent on you? If you just got a woman who's, she's with you because of your money or you're a professional athlete or something else like that, show you're a man, show you're powerful. Right? But if she's like, hey, I have a choice. I have a choice as to who I want to be with. And because of the values that this man shows, because of the kindness and the courtesy that he shows to the world, that is who I choose to partner with. That is who I choose to be in agreement with, depending on what your religious perspectives are. That's who I choose to submit to. For people who believe in that before somebody gets mad at me, right? That's how you show manhood. Juggling 15 different people just shows that, you have access to people. But manhood is about getting other people to want to follow you, work with you, depend on you, feel safe with you. That's manhood to me.
And the other thing too, going another layer is that, and I'm not saying he's saying this, but I saw a lot in the comments. A lot of people feel like because there are more gay men out there, or men who present as quote unquote effeminate, black men who present as effeminate, naturally, whatever the case may be, that's somehow an attack. And the truth of the matter is, the world is smaller now. In my block in West Philadelphia, I wasn't scrolling on something and seeing other people.
Right.
I don't understand why, because you see somebody else who presents differently than you. And I'm not saying he's saying this. I'm just going by, but I've heard this narrative before. But normally they add trans folks in there. They add gay folks in there. Because you see somebody presenting differently. That, oh, my God, Lord, we got Little Nas X and Saucy Santana. Hip-hop's falling apart. No one's masculine anymore. It's kind of like when the one black family moves into the white neighborhood. Oh, we're losing everything. You see something a little bit different. I want to encourage people to see beyond your lens and the harm that does and the conflict that it creates between black gay men and black straight men. The conflict that can create. And I'm not saying he's saying that, but I've just seen that dialogue a lot. And that's unfortunate that people interpret it that way. Then you wonder why folks stay in the closet. Go ahead. I'm sorry.
If your identity is so fragile that the existence of other people who did not subscribe to it the same way threatens your identity, then your identity ain't that strong, right? A simple version. My name is Jason Johnson. I have met 4 other Jason Johnsons in my life. They don't make me feel threatened, right? The existence of another Jason Johnson who lives, including one who's a white guy who was a campaign manager for Ted Cruz. Craziest thing, right? Like, the existence of other Jason Johnsons doesn't make my existence as Jason Johnson any weaker or underfed. I don't have to prove my Jasonness against these other people. It's the same damn thing with manhood. Guess what? You don't have to have anybody else live the way you want to live as a man. And in fact, a real man understands that because he's not out trying to prove to the world that he's a man. He knows he's one on the inside, and other people will appreciate it. And if you don't have people who appreciate it, either 1, you ain't doing it right, or 2, you ain't around the right kind of people. But to be worried about whether a gay black man or a trans black man or anything else, or two women who are in love, or a woman raising a child on her own, or a man stepping in and raising another man's child, if all of those things make your manhood feel threatened, you ain't got no real definition of manhood, because that stuff ain't your problem. A real manhood's number 1 obligation is to yourself and your chosen family and the family that's chosen you. If you worried about what's happening in everybody else's bedroom and everybody else's house, you ain't a real man. You something else. But